When I was a kid, I always wanted to change the world in some way, Michael Paul Smith said as he sat next to a miniature house he was creating. The tiny home on a work table, pristine and precise, was part of a years-long project that had indeed reached from his Winchester home to touch the lives of people at home and abroad. Come to find out, it's the thing that I like to do the most, he added in an interview for a 2015 documentary, Elgin Park by Danny Yord. I put it out there, and it has changed so many people, for more than 2 decades, Mr. Smith painstakingly created a 1/24th scale community he called Elgin Park, an imaginary place that partly harkened to the Pennsylvania mill towns he grew up near. He posted photos he shot of his dioramas on Flickr, the photo-sharing website, and drew an audience that would have been unimaginable when he began his project. At last count, he had more than 16,000 followers, and tens of millions of site visits. In the documentary, he mused about his creation's attraction. It's a very neutral place. There's no conflict there, he said, adding, people who look at my photographs will bring their own stories. They'll say, oh, this reminds me of the house that I grew up in. Get fast forward in your inbox, a look at the news and events shaping the day ahead, delivered every weekday. Thank you for signing up. Sign up for more newsletters here. Mr. Smith was 67 when he died November 19. Henry Goldberg, his longtime partner, told the New York Times that Mr. Smith died of pancreatic cancer and complications of diabetes. Elgin Park is not just my little fantasy, Mr. Smith said in Yord's film. I'm documenting the 20th century in a way, perhaps, but his was not the war and politics view on the 20th century that most history books take, Daniel Stroll wrote for Hemmings Daily, a classic car website, after the Flickr announcement that Mr. Smith had died. Instead, it's a slower-paced view, one that replaces the ills of the modern world with mid-century aesthetics, from the architecture to the flights of fantasy to the cars that started the whole venture, Stroll added. Craig F. Walker, Globe staff, file 2015. Using an X-Acto knife, Mr. Smith constructed his small-scale buildings and then created dioramas that included vintage model cars. Using an X-Acto knife, Mr. Smith constructed his small-scale buildings and then created dioramas that included vintage model cars. Then he arranged his tiny neighborhoods on a folding table, which he set up in various places around Winchester so that, carefully photographed, the backgrounds of trees, power lines, or real buildings became part of the backdrop for his imaginary Elgin Park. I don't have to travel far, he said. Anytime I find a parking lot with a block-long view, there's a site, he told The Times in 2010. For fans, the mix of real and imagined was inviting and irresistible, it's longing for a simpler time. It's the opposite of Instagram or Snapchat, Gail K. Ellison, a longtime friend of Mr. Smith, told The Globe in 2015. They co-authored 2 books, Elgin Park, An Ideal American Town, 2011, and Elgin Park, Visual Memories of Mid-Century America at 1/24th Scale, 2015. I've been surprised at the number of young people drawn to the work, who weren't born in the era he's focusing on, she told The Globe. Elgin Park is not just my little fantasy. I'm documenting the 20th century in a way. From 1998 to 2008, Mr. Smith didn't seek an audience for his work. I figured, who was going to like this? It seemed odd. I collect toys like a 10-year-old. There's a 10-year-old right below the surface, he told The Globe in 2015. When he created his Flickr page, it attracted a comparatively small following, about 1,000 hits in its first year, he estimated in the interview for the documentary, but someone in England who worked for a car magazine sent me an email and said, can I show 1 or 2 of your photographs, he recalled, and added, the day it hit the stands, it went from 1,000 hits to 1 million hits within a day, and it kept going and going and going. He also received hundreds of emails from his fans, and many recounted how Mr. Smith's photos of his dioramas had affected them. A doctor whose practice include those with dementia said the Elgin Park photos drew a response from patients. One man said his autistic child would only go to bed after a visual visit to Elgin Park. "I'd like to think that I have helped," Mr. Smith said in the documentary. He was born in Pittsburgh in 1950, and according to The Times, his parents were Roy and Audrey Smith. Mr. Smith spent his early years in Sewickley, PA, a community northwest of Pittsburgh that helped inspire his fictional town. "Elgin Park is not an exact recreation of Sewickley, but it does capture the mood of my memories," he told The Times in 2010. Mr. Smith told The Globe in 2015 that he was one of 5 children in an Italian-American family. Their kitchen was so small that everyone ate dinner in shifts. He said in the documentary that he was in kindergarten when he realized he was gay. "School was not a pleasant place. The bullying got so bad that the teachers let me leave class 15 minutes before the bell rang because they knew I was getting trombed on," he said in the documentary. At various times he attempted to end his life, but "It's almost like I got my messages from my future self. It said, 'You're going to get through this and you're going to make a difference in your own little way in the world,'" he added. Mr. Smith's family moved to Massachusetts, where he graduated from high school. He also studied at the Worcester Art Museum and the University of Massachusetts Amherst. "My resume looks like what's available in the job force," he said in the documentary. He worked for a cabinet maker and was bit by a dog on his first day as a mail carrier. "I said, 'I'm sorry, I quit,' and then was art director of an advertising company, only to have a heart attack at 33. He also launched a wallpaper and painting business and made models for an architectural firm. Along the way, he was a bartender in a very sketchy bar. "I got fired because I would not wear hot pants." Ultimately, he decided to be a model maker, and appreciated every hardship and success. "Everything you do, you will learn from it and you will use it later on in life," he said in the documentary. Making models suited him creatively and emotionally, though the worldwide success of his photos offered both sustenance and its own challenge. "I'm a recluse," he said in the documentary. "I mean, I'm very personable and I can go outside and talk to people, but recognition is tough for me," Mr. Smith leaves Goldberg, his partner. Information about other survivors and plans for a memorial service were not immediately available. "I almost feel like I'm finishing up the loose ends of my life," he said in the 2015 documentary. "I mean, maybe I'll be here another 20 years, I don't know," he added. "You know, if I passed away tomorrow, that's perfectly alright. I feel like I've done something." Brian Marquardt can be reached at brian.marquardt@globe.com. Follow him on Twitter at Brian Marquardt.